Hey everybody! Today I'm making some index cards using Distress Inks and Oxides for the background, and I wanted to use this color palette. Whenever I draw in my sketchbook, and sometimes I discover a color palette that I like. I note this down in a separate book so I can always reference it, and I have put together some Distress Inks and Oxides that are similar to this color palette. I have here dried marigold, weathered wood, Victorian velvet, old paper, rusty hinge, worn lipstick, evergreen bow, scattered straw, pine needles, and I think that should be chipped sapphire and the ground espresso. In the Distress Inks and in the oxides, I'm using brush corduroy, I don't know. The bundle sage, the iced spruce, I believe, and there was a green, the crushed olive, I think. I'm not going to use all of them, I think. I didn't know that in the beginning, but this was just the color palette that I had in mind and that I arranged next to me. Distress inks come in so many colors, and you cannot have, or I cannot have all within reach, and it's quite difficult to have so many colors to choose from, so I tend to put a color palette together before I start working. I'm working on these index cards. I have those because I bought them accidentally for my daughter and it was the wrong size, so I decided I want to use them to make some index cards. And I have a collage paper here that I made with these two stamp sets, the Mix It Up 5 and 6. And it's a Chinese calligraphy paper with this grid on. And I just stamped it completely with some of the images from these stamp sets using a permanent ink. I'm working on a craft mat today because the Distress inks work better on a craft mat compared to a glass plate. I plan to use this collage paper later in the process. This is the reason why I showed it to you. Everything goes a bit quick here and I have to to make sure that I can catch up with the video and my voiceover. This is the Victorian velvet, and I think it was the dried marigold. The problem is that I cannot read what's on the inks because when I'm editing this, the screen is quite small, so I cannot read what's written on the ink pads. If you're watching this on a bigger screen, you might be able to read that. I work a bit intuitively with my color palette here. I just dip the cards into the inks and see what happens. I thought I'm happy with the green cards and they are just fine. It gives you a first layer and it just changes the look of everything a bit, and I don't mind that. But after I did these cards, I enjoyed that process so much that I ordered a bunch of white index cards, some with a dot grid, some with a usual grid, and some with lines. Just because I was so inspired and I wanted to do more of them. I was inspired by the iCat challenge, which just started on June 1st, and I will not play in this challenge because I think I will not be able to make an index card for 60 days now because it's going to be a bit busy with some new stamp designs I'm making, and yeah, with all the holiday preparations I have to make for August. And I think I can't commit to such a challenge. But I was inspired to make some index cards, and I would be interested if you are playing in this index card challenge and if you are going with the prompts that are provided or if you just do your own thing. I'm drawing the layers on the index cards in between because then the pattern stays on your index card and you don't mix all the colors together. and you get these really lovely layered textures. And that's quite important also to avoid mud. I recently got the question how to avoid muddy colors with distress inks, and I think there are two things you have to take care of. First of all, don't mix complementary colors. Complementary means the colors that are on the opposite side of the color wheel. For example, it's orange and blue, violet and yellow, and green and red. And it's good to have a color wheel next to you so you can check this, because only the colors that are really on the opposite side will make a muddy color or kind of a neutral color, which also can be useful in some kind of projects. But sometimes if you have an orange and a turquoise, and it's a and you can mix those, and sometimes you will get really lovely greens. So you always have to maybe try out which colors will mix nice and which won't. And this is just something you have to take care about. If you use those colors together that make a grayish color, you have to dry the layers in between when you move from one color to the other. And like I did it here, I have some bright colors on my cards, and I'm switching to complementary colors, blues and greens. And I've dried the background so the colors don't mix, they just layer up. They might layer up in some areas, and because of the layering they will make a gray shade, but that is not the case on the whole card. So if there's just a small area with a grayish color, I don't mind that. It also can be quite interesting to have some neutrals in between bright colors. And what I also always take care of, if I have a nice pattern and I don't want to cover it, I take care not to cover it. I just leave it and work on the areas that are not as pretty as I wanted them to be, as I want them to be. So I hope that makes sense. By the way, excuse the noise in the background. These are the frogs outside, and I really love their concert, so I hope you don't mind it. I will now have a look at my cards, and there are some areas that are a bit muddy, and I will check the cards and see where I want to add some other ink, because here the area is quite boring, and I will use another layer of ink. There is not much orange on the top right card, so I will use that orangey color again. And I think I really like this one, so I put it aside. There is also something muddy going on here and a bit boring, so I will also add some color. There is not a lot orange, so maybe I will add orange here. I think that should be the rusty hinge. And there is this big pink area, which yeah, I can't remember if I have covered up everything, but I will add a little bit orange to these cards that I've just mentioned. I just have a look and see where it needs something, and then I add just another layer. You might have recognized that I've started by only using distress inks, not the oxides at this stage. And the reason is, with the oxides, you get more muted and matte colors with this oxidized white effect. And the distress inks stay bright and vibrant. So I start always with the distress inks and then add a little bit of the oxides on top for some interesting extra texture. If you cover everything with an oxide ink, you will get a completely matte and more flat and muted finish. If you like that, it's perfectly okay, go for it. But I love vibrant colors, and I just use the oxides to bring in some kind of neutral color or a bit something that balances out that big vibrancy. And yeah, that's just something you have to maybe take care of if you also love bright colors. You also cannot go over on Distress Oxide with Distress inks. You can go over, of course, but the oxidized, these oxide white effects you get will always come up to the top. Also, if you layer a layer of Distress ink on top, it will come through. I'm now going to add some interesting textures to the cards, and I'm using the Distress microglaze for this. And I use these sponge daubers I have. I think I bought mine in the Action store. And I try to cover these areas that I like, because the microglaze will resist another layer of ink. So I cover the areas that I don't want to lose in my next step. And this will give the really interesting texture here. Of course, the inks have to be dry before you do this. And I usually dry them with my heat tool, because the index cards are so thin that this goes quite quickly. And I don't always want to wait until everything dries on its own. The stencils I'm using here are the small triangles, and the other was the marks number 2. And you don't really see where you apply the microglaze. It will be a surprise, a little bit of a surprise. Another way to create textures, in case you don't have the microglaze, is using a stencil together with the Distress ink. I've demoed this technique quite often, or not quite often, but sometimes on my Instagram reels. And it's a really fun technique, which is quite interesting. Here I made a mistake. I applied the ink to my surface, but I didn't want to do that. And instead of wiping it away, I just use another index card and pick that color up, so I do not waste it. So this is just a step you don't have to take. For the technique I want to show you, you need a stencil, and then you push the ink pad to your stencil, spritz it with quite a good amount of water. If you use not enough water, you won't get a good impression of that stencil texture. And then you place the stencil on your card. I don't know why I haven't that realized a bit earlier. It would be so much easier to just lay the stencil down and then place the card onto the stencil. And I will do this in my next step. I'm glad I realized this, because it's just so much easier. The stencil I'm using here is the marks number 3 stencil. And here I'm placing the card onto the stencil, and that works so well. Super nice technique. I really love this. And you will see this, the result of this is quite similar to the resist effect we will create with the microglaze. It gives you a kind of a bit of different edges. And also this has not a resist to it. So if you add another layer of ink, the pattern will be covered up. With the microglaze, that resist will always stay, and you will not be able to cover that up again with the inks. I'm putting this card aside, and now we're going to work on the cards with the microglaze. And I will experiment a bit. I will use a Distress Oxide ink here. Distress Oxides are a bit opaque, so they work over darker colors as well and will cover them up. And I think it's the bundle sage that I've been using here. And here you can immediately see the effect that I mentioned. The microglaze resists all the ink, and it will stand out from the background. For the other card, I want to use darker ink, so I'm going to use a Distress Ink, and I think I'm using the chipped sapphire. I'm just picking up the leftover ink here with the other cards, so I don't waste any ink. And then I have some backgrounds already ready to go for the next time. And I really prefer the look of the darker pattern on the cards because that makes the bold and bright colors pop up a bit more, and I really love the texture I have here. I think this card with no dark color is a bit boring, so I am going to add some of the blue here as well. And there you can see, even if you have dried this in between, the resist of the microglaze will always be there. So you can add more layers and you will still see this pattern showing through. I have dried the cards completely now, and I am going to add some of this collage paper I showed you in the beginning, because that's a nice technique if you don't have so much time to create, or you don't want to bring out all your stamps and decide what to add and where. This is really easy to get interesting texture quickly. So I'm adhering some bits and pieces onto these cards by using just a glue stick. I would not recommend using gel medium because the Distress inks are water soluble and you might smear your beautiful background. What I love about that thin collage paper is that it blends into the background and lets some of the pattern show through. And I think that is really interesting. And I add the collage papers to those areas that are the most boring in my eyes. So I would not cover up an area that I really like. Of course, instead of using a collage paper, you could also stamp directly to the cards to bring in more texture, and I will demo this on the other two cards. And the reason is because I have the microglaze on the others, and I plan to stamp with the Distress inks. I would also get the resist effect of the microglaze. So I decided to pick the cards without the microglaze to do the stamping. And that's another option to bring in more interest and texture. And I use colors that I have already on the cards so everything stays cohesive. This stamp is from the Vintage Stuff stamp set, and the others are from the Mix It Up 5 and 6. I really love these vintagey images. I think although I have a colorful background, I really like the vintage look on these. I wanted to use that postcard stamp together with some oxide ink to bring in a little bit of a top layer. And before I do this, I make sure that my stamp is clean. I'm not sure if I have some other inks on top and the oxide would mix with that and maybe it will be muddy in the end. So I just spritz my stamp with water again and just make sure there is no other ink on top that will mix with my pink oxide. I'm using the worn lipstick here. I'm not sure if you can see this on camera. I hope so because your screen will be bigger than mine. But the oxide layers quite nicely on top. Not super opaque, but it is there and brings in some interesting textures. One of my favorite ways to bring in texture is to make some splatters, and I'm using also the worn lipstick, Distress Ink, and just make some splatters onto the cards. My cards are dry now and I've zoomed in a little. I have drawn some focal points just with a Tombow Fudenosuke pen, and I will use those as my focal images. I really had a lot of fun drawing these, and there will be probably a new collage leaf stamp set in the future. As they are just black and white and I find it a bit boring, I will color them in quickly with the Distress inks here. And I just used the same technique that I've used for the backgrounds. And I think that's a really lovely and super quick way to color in these kind of botanicals that of course will also work with stamped images. And I really like that I have not everything fully covered. I really like some white spots here and there and also the different colors. I think this is pretty nice. What I also took care of that I use colors that I have on the background, so the focal image goes with the card. My botanicals are dry and I will now arrange them on my cards, and I have searched for just some words to bring in kind of a title, and here I have a jelly print that was stamped with the old book page stamp from the Mix It Up 5 stamp set. I think it's just nice to have something for the leaves to sit on the cards so they don't fly there, and I think that's really nice. I speed this up because the video is already quite long, and this is just quite a boring step, just adhering images and papers. I will show you a photo of each card in the end, and of course you will find photos over on my blog to have a look at each of the cards. I hope you enjoyed today's video and you are inspired. Let me know if you are playing in the iCut challenge and which materials you prefer using on the index cards. I wish you a lovely rest of the weekend and I hope we will see us next time. Bye!